After a violent flood tore through Black Hollow, a struggling veteran and his German shepherd made a discovery no one was supposed to find. Buried beneath the mud was an armored military vehicle, sealed for 20 years. Inside were two fallen soldiers, a shattered safe filled with fake money, and a hidden compartment someone tried very hard to erase. But the real danger wasn't what was inside the vehicle. It was the powerful men who thought the secret was buried forever. What those two soldiers died protecting was never meant to surface. Thank you for being here. I truly wish you peace and strength wherever you're watching from. If stories of courage and loyalty still matter to you, please consider subscribing, and let's uncover this truth together. The storm had passed 3 days ago, but the valley still breathed in damp silence. Gray clouds drifted low over Black Hollow, and the creek that once roared with brown fury now lay flattened into a ribbon of mud and stone. The air smelled of wet leaves, rust, and something older. Nathan Cole moved carefully along the dry creek bed, boots sinking slightly into soft patches of earth. He was 48, broad-shouldered, but worn down by years of labor and a war that never fully released him. A forest green and black plaid flannel jacket hung heavy across his frame, darkened at the cuffs from work. Beneath it, a black thermal shirt clung to his chest. His black jeans were faded at the knees, and his low-ankle brown leather boots were scuffed from roofing jobs that barely paid enough to keep the lights on in his cabin. His face carried the quiet geometry of someone who had seen too much. Square jaw, faint scar cutting through his right eyebrow, short hazel-brown hair flecked with gray at the temples. He rarely smiled, not because he lacked warmth, but because he had learned long ago to measure emotion before showing it. Beside him moved Ranger. The German shepherd's black and tan coat gleamed even under the dull sky, a rich, dark saddle over his back and tan legs powerful and steady. His ears stood upright, pivoting with precision. Amber-brown eyes scanned the terrain with disciplined alertness. Ranger had once been trained to detect explosives and track human scent across hostile ground. Even now, retired from military service, his movements carried that same deliberate intelligence. He did not wander. He assessed. Nathan had come to check the creek for damage. After the flood, fallen branches and debris often clogged the drainage near his property, and clearing it sometimes meant a little extra cash from neighbors who preferred not to get their hands dirty. Money had been tight for months. Roofing contracts had slowed. The old truck needed repairs he could not afford. Every morning he woke with the quiet weight of unpaid bills pressing against his chest. Ranger stopped, not abruptly, not with fear, with intention. The dog's nose hovered inches above a patch of earth near the curve of the creek. His body stiffened, tail low but steady. He inhaled again, longer this time. Nathan noticed the change immediately. "What is it, buddy?" Ranger did not bark. He stepped sideways, repositioning, then returned to the same spot. His paw scraped lightly at the surface. Nathan crouched. The soil here looked different. The flood had dragged debris across most of the creek bed, leaving chaotic patterns of branches and silt. But this patch was smooth, flattened, even. He pressed his palm against it. The earth felt packed, not washed. Then he smelled it. Metal, old oil. And beneath that, faint but unmistakable, burned gunpowder. His heartbeat slowed rather than quickened. Years in uniform had rewired his fear into calculation. Nathan reached for the small shovel strapped to his pack. Ranger shifted forward, then suddenly stepped in front of him, blocking his path. Nathan frowned. "Move, Ranger." The dog didn't. Instead, Ranger edged slightly to the left and lowered his head toward a narrow strip of ground just ahead. His ears tilted forward. He tapped the soil once with his paw, then withdrew it immediately. Nathan understood. He tested the ground with the shovel instead of his weight. The blade pierced through a thin crust, then dropped several inches into empty space. A hollow pocket. If he had stepped forward without thinking, the weakened earth might have given way beneath him. Nathan exhaled slowly. Good catch. He circled around the unstable patch and began digging from a safer angle. The soil came away in heavy clumps. 5 inches down, the shovel struck something solid with a dull metallic knock. Nathan froze. He brushed dirt aside with his gloved hands. A curved surface emerged, dark, matte, scratched by time. He cleared more. It wasn't a pipe. It wasn't farm equipment. It was armor plating. The shape was unmistakable once enough of it surfaced. The rounded contour of a military vehicle roof, thick and reinforced. An armored transport, buried. Nathan's throat tightened. Floods did not bury vehicles like this. Not upright, not clean. He stood slowly, scanning the surrounding terrain. The creek showed no deep gouges, no drag marks indicating something that heavy had been carried by water. The embankments were intact. No crushed trees, no trail of destruction. This machine had not arrived by accident. Ranger stepped back and scanned the ridge above them. Nathan followed the dog's line of sight. For a split second, something flashed near the tree line. Sunlight glancing off glass. A lens. Nathan's jaw tightened. Someone was watching. The reflection vanished as quickly as it appeared. Silence returned to the valley, thick and heavy. Nathan felt the old instinct rising in his chest. Not panic. Awareness. The kind that had once kept him alive overseas. He looked back at the armored roof protruding from the earth. His mind moved through possibilities. Training exercises, abandoned surplus, scrap metal dumped illegally. None of them fit. Vehicles like this were cataloged, tracked, accounted for. He knelt again, brushing more soil away. The metal bore faded military markings beneath layers of dirt. His fingers traced the edge of a sealed hatch. Ranger let out a low, controlled rumble. Not aggression, but warning. Nathan stood once more, eyes narrowing toward the ridge. He understood something now. The flood had revealed the vehicle, but someone had buried it long before the storm ever touched this valley. And if someone had buried it, then whatever was inside was never meant to surface again. He placed a steady hand on Ranger's back. The dog's muscles remained tense beneath his palm. This wasn't the river, Nathan murmured. It was deliberate. Above them, unseen among the trees, a figure shifted slightly before retreating deeper into the woods. Nathan didn't see him leave, but he felt the weight of being observed. And for the first time since returning home from war, the ground beneath Black Hollow felt like hostile territory again. The thing buried in the creek was not wreckage. It was a secret. And someone had just realized it was no longer hidden. Nathan waited until the ridge above the creek fell silent. The wind shifted, dragging damp leaves across the mud, but no second flash of glass returned. He stood still for nearly a full minute, listening the way he had once listened for movement beyond a perimeter wall. Ranger remained alert at his side, ears forward, body angled protectively toward the slope. Only when the forest resumed its ordinary rhythm did Nathan kneel beside the exposed armor plating again. The hatch was half buried, its edge packed tight with hardened soil. Nathan worked methodically, digging around the frame until enough of it showed. The vehicle was an older model military armored transport, matte black beneath the mud, its markings faded but still visible if you knew what to look for. The flood had not moved it. The earth around the wheels was compressed, not churned. It had been lowered here, then concealed. He gripped the hatch handle and pulled. It resisted at first, then gave with a metallic groan that echoed too loudly in the narrow valley. The smell hit him before his eyes adjusted to the dark interior. Stale air, rust, oil, and something brittle and final. Ranger stiffened but did not retreat. Nathan leaned inside. Two skeletons sat slumped in their seats, still dressed in military transport uniforms. The fabric had decayed in places, but the insignia patches remained faintly recognizable. One skull rested against the side window, jaw tilted slightly open, as if caught mid-breath 20 years ago. The other was angled toward the front console. There were bullet holes in the interior panels, small punctures rimmed with corrosion. Spent shell casings lay scattered across the floor. This had not been a crash. Nathan's jaw tightened. He climbed in carefully, boots crunching over brass casings. He did not touch the remains. He simply observed. The main safe compartment mounted to the rear wall had been forced open. Its heavy door hung crooked, pried outward. Inside, bundled stacks of currency filled the cavity, but something was wrong. The bills looked crisp, too uniform. Nathan pulled one loose. The paper felt lighter than it should. The print slightly off. Counterfeit. Fake, he muttered. The transport's GPS unit had been ripped out, wires hanging loose where it once connected. Someone had removed tracking before burying the vehicle. They had destroyed the obvious evidence, but they had left two bodies behind. That meant haste, or confidence that no one would ever look here. Ranger shifted forward and placed his nose beneath the driver's seat. He inhaled deeply, then scratched once at the metal base. Nathan watched the dog's posture. It wasn't curiosity. It was insistence. Nathan crouched and examined the underside. Beneath the grime, a narrow seam cut along the steel panel. Fresh weld lines, less corroded than the surrounding frame. Someone had sealed something recently compared to the rest of the decay. He retrieved a small pry tool from his pack and wedged it into the seam. The weld cracked with effort. After several minutes of controlled leverage, a narrow panel gave way. Inside was a compact compartment, shielded from immediate view unless you knew it existed. Nathan reached in slowly. His hand closed around bundled currency. Real currency. Thick, heavy stacks bound with federal straps. He pulled several out and set them beside him. Beneath the money lay a ruggedized external hard drive, military-grade, shock-resistant casing intact. Next to it was a small handheld recording device, the type issued for field documentation 2 decades earlier. He stared at the items in silence. The safe in the rear had contained counterfeit bills, a staged theft. But the real money had been hidden beneath the driver's seat. That meant the men inside had known something was wrong. They had hidden the truth where their attackers wouldn't think to search. Nathan looked at the skeletal remains again. "You figured it out," he murmured under his breath. "And it got you killed." Ranger let out a low breath, almost a sigh. as if sensing the weight of it. Nathan pocketed the recording device but left the money and hard drive in place for the moment. He climbed out of the vehicle and scanned the ridge again. Nothing moved. Yet the memory of that reflected lens lingered. He considered calling the authorities. But which authorities? In a town like Black Hollow, law enforcement had long relationships, unspoken alliances. Nathan had learned during his first months back from Afghanistan that small communities ran on familiarity more than justice. And sometimes familiarity protected the wrong people. Still, he needed context. He covered the exposed hatch with loose brush and soil, masking it from casual sight. Then he and Ranger made their way back toward the gravel road that led into town. Nathan's truck sat parked beneath a leaning oak tree. Paint faded, engine unreliable but loyal. He climbed in, started it, and drove toward Black Hollow proper. The town was small enough that everyone recognized everyone else. Main Street held a hardware store, a diner, a shuttered movie theater, and the sheriff's office. Nathan parked outside the diner first. If anyone remembered a missing armored transport from 20 years ago, rumors would have started here. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and frying oil. Behind the counter stood Sarah Whitmore, the diner's owner. She was in her early 50s, tall and narrow-shouldered. Her long brown hair streaked with gray and tied loosely at the nape of her neck. Her skin was pale from years indoors, but her green eyes were sharp and observant. Sarah had lost her husband in a logging accident 15 years earlier, and since then her voice carried a calm steadiness that came from enduring grief without collapsing under it. She noticed details. "Nathan," she said softly, "Storm treat you all right?" "Got lucky," he replied, sliding onto a stool. Ranger lay at his boots, silent but watchful. Sarah poured him coffee without asking. "Heard the creek shifted pretty bad." Nathan studied her expression. "You remember an armored transport going missing around here? Early 2000s? Her hand paused slightly above the mug before she set it down. "There was talk," she said after a moment. "2 soldiers, supposed to be weather-related. Why?" "Just asking." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "People said it was strange, but folks don't like digging up old things in this town." Nathan nodded slowly. He finished his coffee and left a few dollars on the counter. As he stepped outside, a man stood near the sheriff's office across the street watching him. The man was tall, broad through the chest, wearing a pressed dark jacket despite the humidity. His hair was slicked back, silver at the temples, and a neatly trimmed gray beard framed a mouth that rarely smiled. His eyes were calculating, almost amused. Richard Jensen, former county commissioner, now owner of Jensen Development, the company responsible for most construction contracts in the region. Jensen offered Nathan a brief nod that did not reach his eyes. Nathan felt the quiet click of intuition settle into place. Whatever lay inside that steel coffin by the creek had not been forgotten by everyone. And someone powerful was already measuring how much he knew. He drove home with Ranger sitting upright in the passenger seat, both of them aware that the secret buried beneath the mud was no longer sleeping. Nathan did not sleep much that night. The image of Richard Jensen standing across Main Street lingered in his mind like an unfinished sentence. At dawn, pale light filtered through the thin curtains of his cabin, casting long bars across the wooden floor. Ranger lay near the door, alert even in rest, ears twitching at the slightest shift of wind. Nathan rose quietly, his forest green and black plaid flannel jacket draped over the chair where he had left it. He pulled it on, slid his worn boots into place, and moved with the restrained efficiency of a man who trusted routine more than comfort. The armored vehicle by the creek remained hidden under loose brush, but Nathan knew it would not stay that way for long. Secrets rarely did. He needed records, paper trails that told a different story than what rumor allowed. Black Hollow's municipal building sat beside the courthouse, a brick structure from the 1960s with narrow windows and fading paint. Inside, the records office smelled of dust and old paper. Behind a waist-high counter sat Margaret Holloway, the town clerk. She was in her late 60s, small-framed with sharp cheekbones and short silver hair cropped close to her head. Thick glasses rested on her nose, magnifying pale blue eyes that had seen decades of local politics shift like weather patterns. Margaret had once been married to a deputy sheriff who died of a heart attack while on duty. Since then, she carried herself with a guarded composure, loyal to the system yet quietly aware of its flaws. "Nathan," she greeted, voice steady but cautious. "What can I help you with?" "I'm looking for incident reports from 2002, he said evenly. "Military transport. Supposed to have been lost during a storm." Margaret's fingers paused over her keyboard. A flicker of recognition passed across her face, quickly masked. "That was handled by the sheriff's office," she replied. "Not much here beyond the public summary. I'll take whatever's public." She hesitated only a moment longer before disappearing into the back room. When she returned, she handed him a thin folder. Too thin. Nathan opened it on the counter. The official report described a severe storm, impassable roads, a missing armored vehicle presumed swept into the ravine. 2 soldiers listed as deceased, bodies unrecovered due to hazardous conditions. Case closed within 72 hours. He scanned the document carefully. There was no forensic detail, no autopsy notation, no coordinates marking a search grid. The investigation summary ended abruptly, as if someone had cut off the narrative mid-paragraph. "Is this everything?" he asked. Margaret adjusted her glasses. "It's what's archived." Her voice softened. "Some things were handled higher up back then." Nathan understood what she wasn't saying. Records can disappear without being erased. As he stepped outside, Ranger walking close at his side, a patrol car idled near the curb. Sheriff Daniel Crow leaned against the hood. Crow was a thick-set man in his early 50s, broad through the shoulders with a square face framed by a trimmed brown beard flecked with gray. His uniform was pressed, badge polished. His eyes, however, held the faint hardness of someone who had learned to weigh loyalty against truth, and often chosen loyalty. Years ago, Crow had lost a younger brother to opioid addiction, and since then he carried an uncompromising public stance against crime. But beneath that stern exterior lived a man who valued stability over disruption. "Morning, Nathan," Crow called, voice calm. "Heard you've been asking about old business." Nathan stopped a few feet away. "Just reading up on town history." Crow studied him for a long second. "History can stay buried for a reason." His gaze dropped briefly to Ranger. "Best not stir up things that settled long ago." It wasn't a threat spoken outright. It didn't need to be. Nathan nodded once. "Appreciate the advice." He walked on, feeling Crow's eyes follow him until he turned the corner. Ranger glanced back once, ears slightly angled, sensing tension Nathan did not show on his face. By late afternoon, word had begun to spread. In small towns, questions traveled faster than vehicles. When Nathan entered the diner again for a late cup of coffee, conversations lowered by a fraction of a decibel. Eyes shifted away too quickly. Sarah caught his look from behind the counter and gave the slightest shake of her head, as if warning him without words. A man Nathan didn't recognize sat near the window. He was tall and lean, late 30s perhaps, with sharp features and dark stubble shadowing his jaw. A faded baseball cap concealed most of his hair. His jacket was city-cut, not local workwear. His eyes followed Nathan openly. When Nathan passed, the man spoke without looking up from his plate. "Some storms wash up more than debris." Nathan paused. "You from around here?" The man smiled faintly. "Passing through." He pushed his chair back and left cash on the table. As he stepped outside, he added quietly, "Be careful what you dig up." Nathan watched him cross the street and disappear into a dark SUV parked at the edge of town. No local plates. By evening, the air over Black Hollow grew heavy again. Nathan drove home slowly, headlights cutting narrow beams through gathering dusk. Ranger sat upright in the passenger seat, gaze fixed ahead. When they reached the cabin, Nathan noticed tire tracks near the gravel entrance, fresh, overlapping his own from earlier that day. He killed the engine and listened. The forest was still, too still. He stepped out, hand resting lightly near the old pistol he kept holstered beneath his jacket. Ranger moved first, circling the perimeter with controlled speed, nose low, posture tense. He stopped near the back window and let out a low, warning growl. The latch had been tampered with, not broken. Tested. Nathan's pulse slowed instead of racing. Someone had come to look, to confirm. He crouched beside Ranger, resting a hand against the dog's thick neck. "It's starting," he murmured. Inside the cabin, nothing appeared stolen, but a subtle shift in placement told him drawers had been opened and closed. Papers moved. Someone searching without leaving obvious damage. Nathan locked the doors, lowered the lights, and sat at the small kitchen table. He set the recording device from the armored transport in front of him, but did not turn it on yet. He wasn't afraid for himself. He was calculating how far someone would go to protect whatever had been hidden for 20 years. Ranger lay beside his chair, head raised, eyes alert. Nathan realized something with quiet clarity. This town had learned to survive by not asking questions. But he had never been good at ignoring what felt wrong. And now someone had crossed onto his land. The silence of Black Hollow was no longer passive. It was watching him back. The cabin felt smaller that night, as if the walls had leaned inward to listen. Rain tapped lightly against the roof, a leftover drizzle from the passing storm, and the forest beyond the windows lay dark and watchful. Nathan sat at the kitchen table beneath a single hanging bulb, his forest green and black plaid flannel jacket still on his shoulders, despite the warmth of the room. Ranger lay near the doorway, chin lifted, amber eyes fixed on the shadows beyond the glass. Nathan placed the rugged external hard drive on the table. It was military issue, matte casing scuffed but intact. He retrieved his old laptop from a shelf, slow, outdated, but reliable, and connected the drive. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a faint blinking indicator light came alive. The first folder contained financial spreadsheets. Detailed, methodical. Government allocation numbers cross-referenced against private contracts. Nathan leaned closer. The dates matched the year the armored transport had disappeared. millions in federal disaster relief funds allocated to Black Hollow and neighboring counties after a devastating flood 2 decades earlier. But the columns did not balance. Large sums had been redirected to a private construction company, Jensen Development. Nathan's jaw hardened. He clicked further. Additional documents showed transfers labeled Veteran Outreach Support, redirected again through Shell subsidiaries before landing in the same corporate accounts. Another folder held scanned contracts, signatures forged or duplicated. Then he found something worse, a subdirectory labeled Inventory. Inside were transaction logs referencing weapons components, military-grade surplus equipment rerouted under the guise of reconstruction supply. The numbers aligned with the missing funds. The initials RJ appeared repeatedly in authorization lines. Richard Jensen. Nathan leaned back slowly, running a hand over his short, hazel-brown hair. The scar above his eyebrow pulled faintly when his brow tightened. He had seen corruption overseas. He had watched aid vanish before reaching villages, but he had never expected to find it here. At home, in a town that prided itself on patriotism and small-town virtue. Ranger rose and padded quietly to Nathan's side. The dog's thick black and tan coat brushed against Nathan's leg as if grounding him. "You see this, buddy?" Nathan murmured softly. "They used us. Used our names." He opened the small handheld recorder recovered from the compartment. Static crackled before voices emerged. 2 male voices, tense but controlled. One said, "If we don't make it to Charleston, someone has to find this." The other replied, "They're already watching us." Then the recording ended abruptly with a sharp, metallic bang. Nathan closed his eyes briefly. Those men had known. They had hidden the truth under their seats and died before they could expose it. A faint click sounded near the back door. Ranger's head snapped up. His body went rigid, ears forward. Nathan killed the laptop screen instantly and reached for the pistol holstered beneath his jacket. He moved toward the back hallway, stepped silent despite his boots. Ranger advanced ahead of him, low and controlled. Near the rear door, Nathan saw it. A thin wire stretched across the threshold at ankle height. Attached to the wire was a small device taped to the doorframe, improvised, crude but effective. An explosive trigger, not large enough to level the cabin, large enough to maim. Nathan crouched, examining it carefully. His breathing slowed into the familiar cadence of disarming under pressure. The device had likely been installed while he was at town hall. A warning, or an attempt to remove him without suspicion. He cut the wire gently and disarmed the device. Sweat gathered at his temples despite the cool air. "They're escalating," he whispered. Morning brought no relief. When Nathan attempted to log into his online banking account to order supplies, an alert flashed. Account temporarily frozen pending investigation. He tried another card. Declined. His phone vibrated moments later. An unfamiliar number. "This is Agent Thomas Bell from the Internal Revenue Service," the voice said, clipped and formal. "We've flagged irregularities in your recent financial activity. We'll require documentation and full access to your accounts." Nathan's gaze drifted toward the laptop still resting on the table. "What irregularities?" "That will be discussed in person. We recommend full cooperation." The line went dead. Nathan knew intimidation when he heard it. By midday, Sheriff Crow's patrol car appeared again near his driveway. Crow stepped out slowly, hat brim shading his eyes. Got a complaint about suspicious activity, Crow said casually. Someone saw you digging near the creek. Nathan kept his expression neutral. Storm damage cleanup. Crow's eyes flicked toward Ranger, then back. Best not involve yourself in things bigger than you. There was something else in Crow's voice now. Not merely caution, but strain. As if he knew more than he could safely admit. After the patrol car left, Nathan noticed a faint clicking noise from his phone speaker when he tried to make a call. Static where none should be. He powered the device down. Someone was listening. The isolation settled around him like fog. Bank accounts frozen, authorities watching. A bomb wired to his door. Whoever orchestrated this had reach. Legal, financial, and violent. He thought of Sarah behind her diner counter, of Margaret at the records desk, of ordinary people who believed the storm had simply claimed 2 unlucky soldiers. They had never known their town's recovery money had built someone else's empire. Nathan stood and walked to the window. Across the valley, construction cranes rose from a distant development site bearing Jensen's name in bold lettering. Ranger came to stand beside him, tall and steady, his presence a quiet anchor. They're trying to box us in, Nathan said softly. The dog's ears twitched, but he did not look away from the tree line. Nathan's mind shifted from reaction to strategy. If local systems were compromised, he would need outside leverage, federal contacts, someone not rooted in Black Hollow's network of loyalties. He thought of an old friend from his unit, Caleb Ortiz, now working in federal investigations in Pittsburgh. Caleb had once dragged Nathan from behind a concrete barrier during an ambush in Kandahar. He was methodical, skeptical, and immune to charm. If anyone could analyze the drive without tipping off local authorities, it was Caleb. Nathan reopened the laptop and encrypted a portion of the files onto a secondary storage card. He packed the hard drive and recorder into a waterproof case. As dusk settled again over the hollow, he stepped outside with Ranger at his side. The valley was quiet, deceptively calm. They had tried to frighten him, to isolate him, to discredit him. Instead, they had confirmed one thing. The data inside that armored vehicle was powerful enough to threaten more than a reputation. It threatened an entire structure built on silence. Nathan closed the cabin door behind him, mind steady despite the storm forming ahead. He had walked through war zones before. He would walk through this one too. The sky hung low and metallic by late afternoon, clouds pressing down on Black Hollow like a lid. Nathan did not wait for nightfall. He packed the waterproof case containing the hard drive and recorder into a worn canvas bag and slung it across his chest. His forest green and black plaid flannel jacket was zipped halfway, the fabric brushing against the holster beneath it. Ranger moved ahead of him down the narrow trail that cut behind the cabin and into the deeper forest. Nathan's plan was simple. Reach the old limestone ridge 2 miles west, where cell reception flickered just strong enough to send encrypted files to Caleb Ortiz. After that, he would decide whether to drive north under cover of darkness. He did not make it a mile. The first engine growl echoed through the trees from the dirt access road that paralleled the creek. Ranger froze, ears erect, head angled toward the sound. Then came a second engine, and a third. Nathan did not curse. He shifted direction immediately, angling uphill through denser brush. 3 black SUVs emerged between tree trunks below, tires crushing fallen branches. They moved with deliberate spacing, headlights off despite the dim light. They know, Nathan muttered. Ranger glanced back once, awaiting instruction. Nathan pointed toward the ridge. The dog sprinted ahead without hesitation. The forest steepened quickly, shale and loose stones sliding under Nathan's boots. His breath deepened, but remained controlled. Years of carrying gear across uneven terrain had not left his body entirely. The canvas bag thudded against his side as he climbed. A sharp crack split the air. The first gunshot struck bark inches from his head, splintering wood. Nathan dropped instinctively, rolling behind a cluster of rocks. Ranger flattened beside him, silent but vibrating with tension. Another shot rang out, closer. Nathan peered downhill. 3 figures were advancing through the trees now, spreading apart. The nearest was a tall man with a shaved head and heavy shoulders, moving with trained precision. Even at a distance, Nathan could see the man's posture. Disciplined, ex-military perhaps. The second was slimmer, moving quicker, rifle held high. The third remained near the vehicles, coordinating. A bullet tore through the air and struck Nathan's left shoulder. It did not penetrate deeply, but sliced across the muscle with brutal heat, tearing fabric and skin in one violent pass. The impact knocked him sideways. He felt warmth flood down his arm instantly. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself upright. Ranger pressed against him briefly, eyes searching his face. "I'm good," Nathan hissed, though pain flared bright and raw. Another shot ricocheted off the rock near his knee. Nathan fired once in return, not to hit, but to stall. The report echoed sharply through the valley. He had not pulled a trigger in combat since leaving Afghanistan. The recoil stirred something old and unwanted inside him. He moved again, forcing his legs to carry him along the slope. Blood dripped steadily from his shoulder, staining the flannel dark. Ranger darted ahead, then veered sharply left toward the sound of water. Nathan followed without question. They slid down into the creek bed, where water still trickled thinly over stone. Ranger splashed deliberately into the shallow flow, circling back to brush against Nathan's leg. He understood immediately. Nathan stepped into the water, letting the current wash over his boots and down the wound. The cold stung fiercely, but it diluted the blood trail. Ranger moved upstream for several yards, then exited onto a rocky bank where footprints would not hold. Another shot cracked overhead. The tall, shaved-headed gunman had closed the distance. He moved steadily through the trees, rifle balanced, eyes scanning. There was no panic in him. He hunted with patience. Nathan crouched behind a limestone outcrop and tore off a strip of his undershirt with his teeth. Working one-handed, he pressed the fabric against the wound and wrapped it tight. The bleeding slowed, but did not stop completely. His arm throbbed with every pulse. Ranger's low growl signaled the man's approach before Nathan saw him. The gunman stepped into view 15 yards away. He was mid-40s, broad through the chest, with a faded tattoo along his forearm visible beneath rolled sleeves. His face was angular, eyes pale and emotionless. Years of something hard had carved into his features. "Drop it," the man called calmly. Nathan did not respond. The rifle barrel lifted toward his chest. Ranger exploded forward. He did not go for the throat. He struck the man's side at hip level with full weight and momentum. The impact jolted the rifle off target. A shot fired harmlessly into the canopy. The man stumbled backward, losing footing on the uneven rock. Nathan seized the second. He fired once more, again not aiming to kill, but close enough that stone fragments burst near the man's feet. The gunman regained balance, but hesitation flickered across his face now. Nathan moved. He grabbed the canvas bag and climbed higher into the limestone cut, where the terrain narrowed into a jagged corridor of pale stone. The space was too tight for vehicles and difficult for multiple attackers to maneuver side by side. Ranger followed close, positioning himself between Nathan and the lower path. The slimmer gunman appeared briefly at the mouth of the corridor but paused, assessing the choke point. Nathan could see uncertainty in his posture. Another distant engine revved below. Nathan understood the calculus shifting in their minds. He was wounded, but not disabled. The ridge narrowed the fight. Prolonging it risked outside attention. After several tense minutes, the men withdrew. The engines below started again, one by one. Only when the forest fell silent did Nathan lower his pistol. His shoulder burned fiercely now, the adrenaline fading. He leaned back against the cool limestone and exhaled slowly. Ranger stepped forward and pressed his muzzle gently against Nathan's uninjured side, amber eyes searching for weakness. "I know," Nathan whispered. "I know." He looked down the corridor of rock and then toward the valley beyond. This was no longer intimidation. It was eradication. They had tried to freeze his finances, to scare him, to trap him inside his own home. Now they had attempted to end it physically. Nathan closed his eyes briefly, feeling the ache in his shoulder and the weight of what he carried in the bag. The war had followed him home, but this time he chose the battlefield, and he would not bury the truth the way they had buried that steel coffin. The limestone corridor shielded them until dusk. When Nathan was certain the engines had not returned, he descended carefully along the backside of the ridge, avoiding the obvious trails. His left shoulder throbbed with each step, the makeshift bandage stiff with dried blood beneath his forest green and black plaid flannel jacket. Ranger stayed close, occasionally brushing Nathan's leg as if counting his steps. They reached the cabin after dark. Nathan did not turn on the main lights. Instead, he moved through the room with a small lantern, keeping the windows dim. He locked the door, reinforced the latch, then sat at the table and unpacked the waterproof case. The hard drive, the recorder, the weight of everything that had followed him home lay before him like a second heartbeat. He powered on the old laptop and encrypted a compressed file of the documents. Then he opened a secure communication channel he had not used in years. The name Caleb Ortiz appeared in his contact list, unchanged since their deployment days. Nathan hesitated only a second before sending a coded message. Caleb responded within 15 minutes. A secure video connection flickered onto the screen. Caleb Ortiz looked older but unmistakable. He was in his late 40s now, darker skin weathered by years of field work, short black hair clipped close to his scalp, a neatly trimmed beard outlining a face sharpened by experience. His eyes were steady, analytical, and carried the same quiet loyalty Nathan remembered from Kandahar. Caleb had once dragged Nathan out of a collapsing compound under fire. The scar across his own left cheek was proof that survival had never come easy. After leaving active duty, Caleb joined a federal investigative unit specializing in financial crimes linked to defense contracts. He believed in systems, but only when they were clean. "You look like hell," Caleb said without ceremony. "Been worse." Nathan angled the camera slightly to hide the blood staining his sleeve. I found something. Black Hollow. Old armored transport. Caleb's posture changed instantly. Send it. Nathan transmitted the encrypted packet. Silence filled the cabin except for the faint hum of electronics and the soft shift of Ranger repositioning near the door. Caleb reviewed the files in real time, his expression tightening. These transfers are federal disaster funds, Caleb said quietly. Veteran support allocations, too. They're rerouted through shell companies tied to Jensen Development. And this. He paused, zooming in on a digital signature. This authorization references Sheriff Daniel Crow. Nathan felt the air thin in his lungs. Crow? It's subtle. Advisory clearance, oversight acknowledgement. But his name's here. Caleb leaned closer to the screen. Nathan, this isn't just embezzlement. These weapon components listed under reconstruction supply. This crosses into federal trafficking. Nathan glanced toward the dark window. They tried to kill me today. Caleb's jaw tightened. You need to leave town. Not yet. Caleb's eyes sharpened. Don't get stubborn. I'm not. I'm careful. Nathan reached for the recorder. There's audio too. He pressed play. Static crackled again before the voices emerged. Two men, younger. One said, they replaced the shipment. It's not matching the manifest. The other replied, breath quick but controlled. If we don't make it to Charleston, someone has to find this. A metallic clang followed, then gunfire. The recording ended. Caleb exhaled slowly. They knew they were being watched. Nathan nodded. They hid the real money under the driver's seat, left counterfeit in the safe. Caleb's gaze met his through the screen. You understand what this means? Yes. Nathan's voice was steady. They were trying to stop it. And now you are. Outside, a vehicle passed slowly along the distant road. Ranger's ears angled toward the sound, but he did not move. Caleb continued. I can open a preliminary federal inquiry, but it will flag local offices. If Crow is involved, he'll know before we act. Nathan leaned back, pain flaring in his shoulder. There's more. He pulled up another document. Embedded metadata revealed the original search coordinates from 2002, coordinates that did not match the official report's supposed storm path. The armored transport had never been near the ravine listed in the public file. The search grid had been falsified. Caleb's expression darkened. They fabricated the accident location. That's obstruction of justice. And that, Nathan said quietly, is why they're desperate. A knock sounded at the cabin door. Both men froze. Ranger stood instantly, body rigid, low growl vibrating through his chest. Nathan muted the call, but kept the connection open. He moved toward the door cautiously. Through the narrow side window, he saw a familiar figure standing beneath the porch light. Sheriff Crow. Nathan opened the door only halfway. Crow's broad frame filled the threshold. In the dim light, fatigue showed in his face, lines deeper than usual. You're making this harder than it needs to be, Crow said softly. For who? Nathan asked. Crow's eyes flicked briefly toward the interior of the cabin, as if sensing unseen equipment. Some things were done to protect the town, he said. Jobs, stability. That money built half of what you see here now. At the cost of 2 soldiers? Nathan's voice remained calm. Crow's jaw clenched. For a moment, regret flickered across his features. It was never supposed to go that far. That was not denial. It was admission. Ranger's growl deepened slightly. Crow stepped back. Let it go, Nathan. You've got enough trouble already." He turned and walked into the night. Nathan closed the door slowly. He returned to the laptop. Caleb's voice came through softly. That sounded like him. It was. Caleb nodded once. "You're not just protecting yourself anymore." Nathan looked at the recorder resting on the table. The voices of the two dead soldiers seemed to echo faintly in his memory. If we don't make it, someone has to find this. He thought about the way Ranger had stood in front of unstable ground by the creek, refusing to let him step forward blindly. He thought about the bullet tearing across his shoulder, about the bomb wired to his door. "This isn't about money," Nathan said quietly. "It's about finishing what they started." Caleb studied him for a long moment. "Then we do it right. We move carefully. I'll prepare federal warrants, but you need to survive long enough for me to use them." Nathan allowed himself the faintest breath of agreement. The war had followed him home, yes, but this time he was not fighting for territory. He was fighting for the truth two men had died trying to deliver, and he would not let their promise remain buried beneath the creek. The moon rose pale and thin over Black Hollow, washing the limestone ridge in cold silver light. Wind moved through the trees in long, restless breaths. Nathan stood at the edge of the creek once more, his forest green and black plaid flannel jacket dark against the night, black jeans dusted with dried mud, shoulder wrapped tightly beneath the fabric. The wound burned, but he ignored it. Ranger stood beside him, black and tan coat blending into shadow, amber eyes reflecting faint light as he scanned the ridgeline with disciplined calm. Nathan had sent Caleb the final packet of evidence 2 hours earlier along with a set of coordinates. Caleb's message had been simple. "Stall them. We are moving." Nathan stepped into the clearing and deliberately brushed dirt away from the hatch of the armored vehicle, letting metal glint under moonlight. He wanted it visible. He wanted watchers to see that the secret was no longer buried. He did not wait long. Headlights cut through the trees from the upper dirt road. 2 black SUVs descended slowly, engines low and controlled. Ranger's ears tilted forward, but he did not growl. Richard Jensen stepped out first. Under the headlights, he looked exactly as he always did in town. Pressed dark jacket, silver hair slicked back, neatly trimmed gray beard outlining a composed face. He was in his late 50s now, tall and straight-backed, a man who had built his image on confidence and civic generosity. His eyes were pale blue, intelligent and calculating, but tonight there was tension beneath the surface. Behind him emerged Sheriff Daniel Crow, broad-shouldered in uniform, jaw set tight. 2 additional men stood near the vehicles, one of them the shaved-headed gunman Nathan had seen before. Jensen approached slowly, hands visible but posture commanding. "You should have walked away," he said calmly. His voice carried the smooth cadence of someone used to public speeches and ribbon cuttings. "You don't understand the scale of what you're interfering with." Nathan stood firm beside the partially unearthed vehicle. 2 soldiers died because they found out. Jensen's expression flickered briefly. They interfered in matters that did not concern them. They were transporting federal funds. "They were pawns," Jensen replied sharply. "Like you are now." Crow shifted slightly but said nothing. His eyes avoided the armored hatch. Nathan's pulse remained steady. "You falsified the search grid. You rerouted relief money. You built half this town on theft." Jensen's composure thinned. "That money kept Black Hollow alive after the flood," Roads rebuilt, homes restored, jobs created. You think Washington cared? He gestured broadly at the valley. I did what was necessary. And the weapons transfers? Nathan asked quietly. For a moment, silence hung heavy. Jensen's eyes hardened. You don't see the whole picture. I see 2 dead men who tried to expose it. Crow finally spoke, voice low. Richard, enough. Jensen ignored him. His hand moved subtly toward his jacket. Nathan saw it. Ranger saw it first. The pistol appeared in Jensen's grip with surprising speed. Ranger launched forward. He did not leap at Jensen's throat. He drove into Jensen's right side with explosive force, striking at the hip and forearm. The shot fired, but the muzzle jerked wide. The bullet tore harmlessly into the night sky. Nathan closed the distance in 2 strides, grabbing Jensen's wrist and twisting hard. The pistol clattered onto rock. Jensen stumbled backward, shock replacing confidence. The shaved-headed gunman raised his rifle, but headlights flared behind the ridge at that exact moment. Multiple vehicles, red and blue lights flashed against the trees. Federal agents! A voice commanded sharply from the darkness. Caleb Ortiz stepped forward from the lead vehicle, badge visible under tactical light. His movements were precise, controlled, weapon drawn but steady. Behind him were 6 agents in body armor, rifles trained. The shaved-headed gunman hesitated. That hesitation ended everything. Agents moved swiftly, disarming and restraining him and the second man within seconds. Crow stood frozen, eyes darting between Jensen and the approaching agents. Caleb approached Nathan first, assessing the scene quickly. His gaze flicked to Nathan's bandaged shoulder, then to Ranger standing alert but restrained at Nathan's side. You always did know how to draw attention, Caleb said quietly. Jensen struggled against Nathan's grip until agents pulled him back and forced him to his knees. For the first time, the carefully curated mask cracked. Sweat beaded at his temples. You don't understand what you're destroying, Jensen hissed. Caleb knelt beside him. We understand exactly what you built. Crow lowered his head slowly as an agent stepped forward to cuff him. His earlier strength seemed to drain away, replaced by something like resignation. It was supposed to protect the town, he murmured. At what cost? Caleb asked. Crow did not answer. Ranger remained poised, chest rising steadily, eyes never leaving the restrained men. He did not bark. He did not strain against Nathan's hand. His job was done. As agents secured the vehicles and collected evidence, the valley filled with flashing lights and murmured commands. The secret that had slept beneath the creek for 20 years now stood exposed under federal authority. Nathan released Jensen's arm only when agents had full control. His injured shoulder throbbed sharply now that adrenaline was fading. Caleb stepped closer. You held long enough, Caleb said quietly. Nathan looked down at the armored vehicle. They tried to finish it. And you finished it for them, Caleb replied. In the distance, faint porch lights flickered on across Black Hollow as residents woke to sirens and flashing lights. Windows opened. Shadows shifted behind curtains. The silence that had wrapped the town for decades began to fracture. Nathan rested a hand on Ranger's neck. The dog leaned slightly into him, steady and grounded. The 2 soldiers' voices from the recording echoed in his mind again. If we don't make it, someone has to find this. He had found it. And now it would not be buried again. The sirens faded by dawn, leaving Black Hollow suspended in a strange, fragile quiet. Morning light spilled over the ridge where federal vehicles had stood hours before. The armored transport was no longer hidden. Agents had secured it overnight under floodlights, photographing every inch before hauling it away under escort. The valley looked the same as it had the week before. Trees, creek, mist rising from damp earth. But something invisible had shifted. Nathan stood on his cabin porch, forest green and black plaid flannel jacket resting loosely over his shoulders, left arm still bound beneath the fabric. The wound had been cleaned and stitched by a federal medic at the scene. It would scar, but it would heal. Ranger sat beside him, posture tall, black and tan coat catching early sunlight. The dog's amber eyes were calmer now, scanning the tree line out of habit rather than alarm. By midday, news vans lined Main Street. Black Hollow had never seen that many cameras. The federal press statement confirmed arrests tied to financial crimes, embezzlement of disaster relief funds, and illegal weapons transfers. Sheriff Daniel Crow and Richard Jensen were named publicly. The silence that had once protected them collapsed under national scrutiny. Nathan did not attend the press conference. He stood instead at the back of the small community hall when two families were brought forward privately. The first was Mary Halpern, widow of Sergeant Thomas Halpern, one of the two soldiers found in the armored transport. Mary was in her early 50s now, shorter than Nathan expected, with pale skin freckled by years of working outdoors. Her auburn hair had faded to a muted copper and was pulled back in a practical knot. Grief had aged her face prematurely, carving faint lines at the corners of her mouth. For 20 years, she had lived with the stigma of uncertainty. Whispers that her husband had mishandled the transport during a storm. She had raised their son alone, holding on to a folded photograph of Thomas in uniform. When federal officials confirmed that Thomas had died attempting to report corruption, Mary did not cry immediately. She stood very still, shoulders trembling, absorbing the weight of truth. Only when she looked at Nathan did her composure break. "You found him," she said, voice fragile but steady. Nathan nodded once. "He tried to do the right thing." She stepped forward and took his uninjured hand. "So did you." Beside her stood her son, Jacob Halpern, now 23, tall and lean like his father in the old photographs, dark hair cropped close, eyes carrying the quiet intensity of someone shaped by absence. Jacob had enlisted in the National Guard 2 years earlier, partly to reclaim a name that had been clouded by rumor. He looked at Ranger with a faint, almost reverent expression. "He kept you alive?" Jacob asked softly. Nathan glanced at Ranger. "We kept each other alive." The second family was smaller. Only an older sister of the other fallen soldier had been located, a woman named Diane Mercer. Diane was in her late 40s, tall and narrow-shouldered, with straight blonde hair cut to her chin and sharp gray eyes. She had become a school teacher after her brother's death, dedicating herself to stability and routine because chaos had once torn her life apart. She listened quietly as officials explained how her brother had hidden evidence inside the vehicle. When she learned he had attempted to expose the scheme, pride overcame sorrow. "They called it a storm," she said bitterly. "All these years." "It wasn't," Nathan replied gently. Within weeks, the federal investigation expanded. Financial accounts were frozen not to intimidate the innocent, but to trace the stolen funds. Audits reopened contracts from 20 years earlier. The relief money diverted through Jensen Development was recovered in portions. redirected toward the veteran support programs it had originally been meant to fund. Nathan received a legal compensation award for uncovering the evidence and cooperating in the federal case. The sum was not astronomical, but it was enough. He paid off his debts first: the overdue mortgage, the medical bills, the truck repairs. He hired a small crew to reinforce his cabin foundation and replace the aging roof he had never had time to fix for himself. But he did not stop there. With guidance from Caleb and part of the recovered funds allocated legally, Nathan applied for permits to convert an unused warehouse near the edge of town into a training and rehabilitation center for veterans struggling with post-traumatic stress. He named it the Ridgeline. The building had once stored farm equipment, its concrete floors cracked and walls weathered. Over months, it transformed. Clean training rooms, quiet therapy spaces, outdoor obstacle areas. Ranger was at the center of it all. Ranger, now approaching 8 years old, moved with calm authority among the first group of veterans who arrived. His coat gleamed under sunlight as he demonstrated obedience drills, scent tracking exercises, and grounding techniques. Veterans who had not slept through a full night in years found themselves breathing more steadily when the dog leaned against their knees. Ranger did not bark unnecessarily. He observed. He sensed agitation before it erupted. His presence alone steadied rooms that once felt volatile. One of the first participants was Marcus Lane, a former Army medic in his early 30s. Marcus was tall, but carried himself as if perpetually bracing for impact, shoulders hunched slightly forward. His dark curls were cropped short, and faint circles shadowed his brown eyes from chronic insomnia. He struggled with sudden noise triggers and avoided crowds. During his first week at the Ridgeline, Marcus flinched at every unexpected sound. Ranger approached him slowly, sat without command, and rested his chin gently against Marcus's knee. For the first time, Marcus's breathing evened out without medication. Nathan watched from a distance, flannel sleeves rolled up, scar above his eyebrow catching afternoon light. He did not speak much during sessions. He did not need to. The veterans recognized in him the same quiet understanding they carried. Black Hollow changed slowly, not overnight. But conversations reopened. People spoke openly about what had happened. Sarah's diner buzzed with debate instead of silence. Margaret Holloway volunteered part-time at the Ridgeline, organizing paperwork with meticulous care. Even Jacob Halpern began assisting with physical training sessions, reclaiming his father's legacy not through anger, but through service. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the valley, Nathan stood outside the renovated warehouse with Ranger at his side. The hills were peaceful now, shadows long and gentle. He understood something then. Peace had never meant the absence of darkness. It meant the willingness to confront it. 20 years earlier, 2 soldiers had refused to look away from corruption. They had paid with their lives. Nathan had simply finished what they began. Ranger leaned slightly against his leg, solid and warm. This time he had not fought alone, and he never would again. This story began with mud and silence, with something buried beneath a creek that no one wanted to remember. But in the end, it was never just about stolen money or corruption. It was about 2 soldiers who refused to betray their oath. It was about a man who could have walked away, yet chose to stand firm. And it was about a loyal German shepherd who never hesitated when courage was required. Nathan did not uncover treasure. He uncovered truth. He did not fight for revenge. He fought for honor, for families who had lived under shadows, and for a town that deserved to breathe without fear. In a world where silence can feel safer than honesty, one act of bravery can ripple outward and restore what seemed permanently broken. Sometimes the miracle is not a sudden rescue from danger. Sometimes the miracle is the strength placed in a heart at the exact moment it is needed. God does not always part the storm, but He gives the courage to walk through it. Thank you for walking this journey with us. May faith, loyalty, and kindness guide your steps wherever you are. If this story touched your heart, we are grateful you are here.